Morning committee on this beautiful Friday morning. The committee is chuckling. A lot of people like to be on the road to get back to western Kansas or southern Kansas or Johnson County for that matter, and do a lot of work over the weekend, but we have some committee work to do on this last day. We're going to reopen a discussion about Senate Bill 315 from yesterday. Senator Baumgardner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was on the prevailing side on the vote on that, and I ask that it be brought up again for reconsideration.
Point of order.
Yes.
My understanding is in regard to the prevailing side, there were 4 of us who voted no, which was the prevailing side, myself, Senator Petty, Senator O'Shea, Senator Blasey. There were 3 voted the opposite direction, 1 abstained, and you do have to be on the prevailing side to bring forward a motion to reconsider.
An abstention, Madam Chair, is on the prevailing side.
And I would just say that in committee, as long as the bill has not been turned in, we can, it's the up to the chair to reopen that bill, unlike on the Senate floor. I have checked with this from several different sources.
Okay. Per Robert's rules and the Senate rules, the prevailing side means voted with the prevailing side.
I'm aware. Thank you.
Okay.
Senator Baumgardner.
Madam Chair, I move we pass out Senate Bill 315 as amended favorably for passage.
Do we?
We need to have a vote on the reconsideration.
Yes. So do we have to have a vote if I'm just reopening the discussion on 219?
You can't do that.
Yeah, actually I can. It's not been turned in, and I've been told that I can reopen the discussion on committee, during committee. And so...
We voted a bill out,
No.
reconsidering a bill. We have to vote on that.
We can do that. Let's vote on reconsideration. We've heard the motion. Do we have a second? Senator Thompson. All in favor of reconsideration, please say aye. Aye. Opposed?
No.
The ayes have it. Aye. And so if you're an aye, please raise your hand. Opposed? Chair breaks the tie. We're back to your motion, Senator Baumgardner.
Madam Chair, point of order. Do we need to rework the entire bill? If we're reconsidering the bill, are we reconsidering it at the point with which we stopped with amendments, or are we reconsidering the initial bill?
We stopped the amendments, and so we're back on the bill itself.
The initial bill, or where we had amended it to?
The bill as amended. And Senator Baumgardner, you have asked.
Madam Chair, I move we pass out Senate Bill 315 as amended favorably for passage.
And Senator Baumgardner, it might help the committee to understand that, but was it your intention to abstain yesterday during committee?
It was. I was still trying to determine if we needed language. I was trying to get feedback from individuals as far as the what had been shared by Senator Stephan with regard to new language, or if we should wait until feedback from the institutions to possibly have a floor amendment.
Senator Petty.
So, Madam Chair, with that, there is clarification that Senator Baumgardner did abstain and did not vote on the prevailing side.
Understand. And now we will take a motion on the bill. Yes. Senator O'Shea.
You know, it's so funny that here we are having to manipulate the rules. It's honestly just gross. Thank you.
Yes, Senator Erickson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is not manipulation of the rules. These are the rules. As long as a bill is in committee, it is never dead. It is always up to the chair's prerogative to bring it back. There's nothing unseemly going on here. A motion to reconsider is appropriate. And so this isn't any violation or manipulation of the rules. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Senator O'Shea?
Madam Chair, I disagree.
Senator Baumgardner?
Thank you, Madam Chair. For those of us that have served as chairs, we know that even bills introduced this year, if they don't pass out of committee, are still going to be alive next session. So they stay alive in the legislative process for that 2-year cycle. Thank you, Madam Chair.
And I have done a lot of checking on this and research on this to make sure that this was appropriate.
Madam Chair.
Senator O'Shea?
Madam Chair. It's interesting because I've been doing checking too, and you're arguing that it's up for reconsideration. Yes, but it needs to be from the prevailing side. And Senator Baumgardner did not vote no. She didn't vote. So that's the part that isn't following the rules.
I understand, however, that applies if you're on the Senate floor. That does not apply in committee because the chair can reconsider and the chair can bring
Which is what's
the bill.
manipulative. Thank
That
you.
has not been turned in. Okay, do I have a motion? I believe that you gave the motion earlier, Senator Baumgardner. Do we have a second? Senator Thompson. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
And it seems to be a tie, and the chair breaks the tie. House Bill, as amended, 315 has passed committee. Committee, we're moving on to our first hearing, House Bill 2313. Our first proponent is Jean Godden. And Jean, I know you promised me that you keep this very short, and we appreciate it.
Sorry, I didn't know if the revisor needed to explain the bill first, or?
Yes, the revisor does need to explain the bill first. Thank you. It's very helpful if she does.
Thank you, Madam Chair. House Bill 2313 creates the Born Alive Infants Protection Act. Section 2 sets out definitions that are used in the bill. Section 3 categorizes who is included in the provisions of the bill. And so sections 1 through 8, are all new language. And section 4 would state that in the case of an abortion or attempted abortion, if the child is born alive, any healthcare provider who is present must exercise that same degree of care that they would use for any other infant born at that age, and ensure that the child who is born alive is immediately transported as well as admitted to a hospital. New Section 5 would state that if a person knowingly or recklessly violates the provisions of Section 4 and does not administer that care, they would be guilty of a severity level 10 non-person felony. And subsection B of New Section 5 would state that if a person intentionally performs or attempts to perform an overt act who kills a child who is born alive during an abortion or attempted abortion would be guilty of a severity level 1 person felony. And that's the most, excluding non-grid offenses, that's the most serious felony level available. Section 6 would create a civil cause of action for a parent's or custodial guardian of the woman upon whom the abortion was attempted, could bring a civil action if Section 4 were violated, and it would create a prevailing party provision to allow for a payment of attorney's fees for that prevailing party. Section 7 would specify rules that would govern the civil or criminal action brought pursuant to Section 5 or Section 6. Section 7 states that it creates reporting requirements for a medical care facility, so a hospital or abortion provider where the abortion or attempted abortion was performed would be required to submit an annual report to the Secretary of Health, and that report would be required to disclose the age or the number of infants as well as the age, medical actions taken to preserve the life of the infant, outcomes, as well as medical conditions of those infants who were born alive. The Secretary then could have fines and other administrative procedures for facilities who did not comply. And Section 9 creates a severability clause. So if any section of this bill were deemed unconstitutional or invalid, the other sections could prevail. And Section 10 amends KSA 65-445, just updating that language for the required reporting and making those reports confidential. And this passed the House on a vote of 88 to 34. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Jenna. Committee questions for Jenna. Senator Petty.
Chair, Jenna, currently under federal law, what is the stipulations when, in the case of a birth, an abortion?
What do you mean?
So what does federal law dictate right now, as far as if there's a live birth?
Oh, so once an infant has passed through the birth canal or is born through a C-section and is alive, they would be considered a human. And if you were to injure, you would be subject to all the other regular protections that any other human being would be subject to. So if you were to kill an infant who was born alive under current law, that would be homicide.
So that's under current law.
Yes.
And so this, as a under current, how does this then change current law?
So what I can tell you is that it adds additional language requirements for those healthcare providers who are in the hospital, as well as additional criminal penalties for not providing that care immediately, and also the reporting requirements do not exist in current law.
So as a follow-up, so this, as opposed to current law, so if a birth occurs and let's say that the parents already know that this fetus has unsustainable medical conditions that will not allow it to survive. The organs are outside the body, or brain's exposed, or whatever. And so under this, when that fetus is born, then now the hospital or the facility would have to immediately provide life-saving measures, could not allow that infant to be with the parents, even though it was not going to survive. Now would have to provide life-saving measures that would not be change the outcome at all. So does this then make it a crime if that does not occur?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Senator Petty. So Section 4 would require that if a child were born alive, the medical professionals would have to exercise the same degree of professional skill, care, and diligence to preserve the life and health and safety of the child as a reasonably diligent and conscientious healthcare provider would render to any other child who was born alive at that same gestational age, and ensure that the child who is born alive is immediately transported and admitted to a hospital. So it would require in paragraph 1 if a child were born prematurely, naturally at 22 weeks, what care would we provide to that child? That has to be provided to the child who survived the attempted abortion, as well as then immediately transported and admitted to a hospital. So if they were at a abortion facility that's not considered a hospital, they would have to be transported to the hospital.
So at any stage, when they're born, those kinds of procedures would have to be applied no matter about survivability.
Yes, the issue of conditions non-compatible with life is not addressed in the bill. So whatever care you'd provide to a similarly born infant prematurely, you'd have to do for this infant.
Thank you.
Other questions for Jenna, committee? Seeing none, thank you, Jenna. And now we'll begin with Jean.
Thank you, Chairwoman Gossage, members of the committee. I'm Jean Gowden, Director of Government Relations with Kansans for Life. KFL believes that infants who are born alive during an abortion should not be discriminated against because of the circumstances of their birth. And the 2002 Federal Born Alive Infants Protection Act does not explicitly require that a baby born alive during an abortion must be afforded the same degree of care that would apply to any other child born alive at the same gestational age. So HB 2313 clearly spells out the obligations of healthcare providers who are present at the time the infant's born alive during an abortion. Many abortion clinics are not equipped to handle complications suffered by women undergoing abortions, let alone care for a newborn. And so these women are transported to a hospital for treatment. The child who survives an abortion deserves no less than to be transferred to a hospital where any further evaluation can take place. And of course, his or her mother is certainly able to go with her child if she so desires. Unlike the federal law, HB 2313 also includes penalties for violations, including overt acts that are intended to kill the infant born alive, and it creates a civil cause of action. Sadly, there's many cases across the country of babies born alive and left to die or intentionally killed. And the Abortion Survivors Network, founded by Melissa Oden, an abortion survivor who also has submitted testimony for your review, has identified over 640 abortion survivors. And their organization's research indicates that approximately 2 in every 1,000 abortions, these infants are born alive. So HB 2313 improves reporting requirements to the KDHE, and I think surely we can all agree that a child who survives an abortion deserves the same health care as any other infant born alive at that gestational age. I encourage you to consider the testimony of Dr. Kelly Bird, which was submitted to you. She's a pediatrician in Johnson County who outlines the standard of care for newborns born at different stages of development. And also Representative Ron Bryce, who tells a very moving story of when he, as a young doctor, was called to care for a baby boy born alive as a result of an abortion. So I ask the committee to please pass 2313 out favorably for passage, and I'll stand for questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you, Gina. Now we have on WebEx. Is she ready for us, Dusty? Sarah Zagorski, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Good morning.
Could you please try to keep, can you hear me? We're going to ask you to please try to keep your testimony short, around 2 minutes if you could.
Absolutely. Well, good morning, members of the committee. My name is Sarah Zagorski. I'm so honored to be here with you today. I hope my testimony makes it harder to dismiss stories from people like me. I speak in support of House Bill 2313, the Born Alive Infants Protection Act. I'm an abortion survivor. In January of 1990, my birth mother, a Hispanic woman from Honduras, sought the help of infamous abortion physician, Dr. Akpalabi. He delivered me at 26 and a half weeks, breech, and when I was born, he advised my mother to let me die on the table. He actually told her that I would be a mental vegetable incapable of having a normal life. Of course, as you can see, that isn't incorrect. Thankfully, in a brave decision, my mom demanded that I receive medical care, and I was sent to Children's Hospital in New Orleans, where I did recover. At that time, Dr. Akpalabi was under review by Louisiana's Medical Board of Examiners for performing a botched abortion the year prior in 1989, making my mother's threat of a lawsuit persuasive to him. Only then, though, did the abortion physician send me to the hospital because of my mother's bravery. This bill is common sense legislation, and it is a shame to me, even incomprehensible, that this is a debate, because we're talking about infanticide. Leaving a baby to die on the table is infanticide. This is transcends the abortion conversation. We're talking about a baby that's been born alive. Many people in Kansas agree with this position. They see this position. They understand that this is about infanticide instead of abortion. And to be clear, I want to say that it's barbaric to me that we're even having this conversation. We have to have this conversation, and there's so much arguments about if a baby that's born alive should receive medical care. Abortion survivors like me often hear that this occurrence is very rare, and as you just heard, it's not as rare as people think. And my plea to you today is, even if it saves one life from death, like mine, isn't that worth fighting for? Thank you so much, and I'll take questions as well at the appropriate time.
Sarah, thank you so much for your testimony. Committee, we have written proponent testimony. There are no opponents, so we will now open this up for questions. Any questions for either of the proponents? Senator Holscher.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess Jeannie, and it is Jeannie, isn't it, or Jean? Jean. Oh, sorry about that.
That's okay. It's spelled like Jeannie, so either one's fine.
Okay, great. Can you tell me, how is a facility supposed to report statistics for fetuses that are, say, less than 9 weeks old?
Well, according to the bill, and of course there already is reporting for abortions that are performed in the state of Kansas. Providers are supposed to report those, and they do it in increments of gestational age.
Okay. Well, and then, so that leads me to the next question then. How is a provider supposed to save a 9-week fetus?
The provider is supposed to provide the exact same care to a 9-week gestational baby born alive as he or she would if that 9-week gestational age baby would be born in any other circumstance outside of abortion.
Okay, but
Same care.
I'm not aware of medical technology that saves a 9-week-old fetus.
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Committee, other questions? Seeing none, do I hear a motion on House Bill 2313? Senator Baumgartner?
Thank you, Madam Chair. At the time I was in college and worked at the in a neonatal ICU, worked night shift while I was taking classes during the day. We did have a child, an infant, a babe is how it's referred to in the doctor's notes. A babe was an attempted abortion, did survive, and I was a part of the team that helped care for that. So I do move out I make a motion, we move out House Bill 2313 favorably for passage.
Do we have a second?
Madam Chair, I'd like to bring an amendment.
Okay.
Jenna, if you would pass it out.
Did we close the hearing? Was that okay.
I'm sorry, the hearing on this bill?
Yeah. I don't know that we formally did.
On House Bill 2313? I normally don't close a hearing until we voted on the bill.
Just the testimony.
Oh,
You usually do. To close the hearing, you don't go right to voting on the bill immediately. Usually you wait a day.
oh, I understand what you're saying now, right, because we're voting the same day that we had the hearing. Thank you for that correction. So, committee, are there any objections to voting on this bill immediately after the hearing? Seeing none, then that closes the hearing, and now we will take final action on that. Oh, except she has an amendment. Thank you. Those in the audience and on WebEx, typically we do not vote on bills on the same day, but because this is the last day of committee, we are going to be voting on bills. It's a little bit different today. Yeah.
Madam Chair, can I explain my amendment?
Yes, but this is part of, no, I'm just saying technically this is part of final action. When we take final action on a bill, then we ask for the motion, we ask for a second, then we ask if there are any amendments. But we can take the amendment now.
Thank you. Page 2, line 11, 10 and 11, ensure the child who is born alive is immediately transported and admitted to the hospital. There was some concern about the and admitted. We need to get in the hospital. I've talked to the proponents, and they, this is a friendly amendment. Would like to see this striked. I'll move my amendment.
Right, do we have a second for the amendment? Senator Thompson. Any discussion? Senator Holscher.
I'm sorry, I was reading at the same time you were talking, or if the reviser wants to answer. Can you clarify for me then what this removes or changes?
Thank you, Madam Chair, Senator Holscher. It would not require an infant be admitted to a hospital. They would just have to be transported. At that point, the medical professionals could decide whether or not admitting the infant would be necessary or not.
Senator Steffen.
Thank you. I am afraid that striking and admitted leaves things open to interpretation. It leaves the opportunity for somebody to try to circumvent the situation. I'll grant that and admitted is probably not appropriate in that it's not the person's decision to admit the patient to the hospital. More appropriate language would be transported and care and brought to a point where care is provided, or the opportunity for care is provided, not just pull up to a hospital and sit there for another 5 minutes while the baby dies. So while I think the bill is a bit askew, I think the amendment is askew, and I do think it needs to be looked at probably in conference to get the correct terminology, but we're not there yet either way.
Jenna, correct me if I'm wrong, the way I read number 1, right above the stricken part in section 2, is exercise the same degree of professional care, diligence to preserve the life and health of the child as reasonably diligent, conscientious healthcare provider would render to any other child born alive at the same gestational age. So when the child comes to the transported to the hospital, we would expect that they would treat this no differently than had the baby been born at home or in a car or in an ambulance on the way, correct?
Yes and no. Thank you, Madam Chair. So subsection A specifies this is the behaviors that the healthcare professionals present at the time the child is born alive would have that requirement. And then section 2 states that they would be transported to a hospital. At the point at which they're at another facility, those healthcare providers would not be subject to the provisions of A1, but instead they would be subject to the regular rules that apply every time a doctor or other healthcare professional is treating a patient, their rules of professional conduct. So that would just be the way you treat, it's essentially the duty those other healthcare professionals would have at that hospital would be the same for every other child that they see. So it would be no different.
Thank you, committee. Any other questions regarding the amendment? Yes, Senator O'Shea.
Madam Chair, I worked with Kansans for Life on this amendment, so my question to Senator Stephan is, does he think that we're not in the best interest of the children with this amendment?
Mm-hmm. So I would ask for Jean to come to the microphone. And you see this as a friendly amendment?
Yes.
Thank you. We have a motion on the amendment. We have a second by Senator Thompson. All in favor of the amendment, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? The amendment has carried, and we are back on the bill. Do we have a motion on the bill? I think we had a motion, but we didn't get a second. I believe the motion was from Senator Baumgartner. Do we have a second on the motion? Senator O'Shea? Yes.
The motion needs to be changed since we have the...
As amended.
As amended.
Thank you. Senator O'Shea has a second. And committee, all in favor of the motion to pass out Senate Bill 2313, or House Bill 2313 as amended, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? The bill has been passed out of committee. Thank you, committee. I would turn our attention to House Bill 2141. Jenna, would you give us a brief overview?
Thank you, Madam Chair. House Bill 2141 relates to assistance under the temporary assistance for needy families. And the bill looks long because the statute, KSA 39709, is a very long statute, but the changes are relatively short. I will just give you the ballpark of where we're at. So for temporary assistance for needy families, an individual to be eligible to receive that assistance has to have insufficient income or resources to provide a reasonable subsistence compatible with decency and health. KSA 39709 also sets out requirements to be eligible for that assistance. And the changes here are mainly on page 5 and 6. And this would be in, I'm trying to find the paragraph, but it would be A11, excuse me, and it would, so current law states that individuals who have not cooperated with good cause for child support would be ineligible to participate in the food assistance program. This would change that language to specify custodial and non-custodial parents shall cooperate with child support enforcement to be eligible for food assistance in accordance with federal law. And then the House had amendments that would give some guardrails to that. My paperclip here. In paragraph B, it would state that the secretary shall require review of child support compliance of custodial or non-custodial parents upon certain criteria. And then that paragraph C would state that a custodial or non-custodial parent shall be disqualified from participating in the food assistance program when that parent is delinquent in making payments under a court order for the support of a child in accordance with federal law. And then the disqualification of subparagraph C, this gives exclusions, would not apply if a court is allowing the custodial or non-custodial parent to delay payment if the custodial or non-custodial parent is complying with a payment plan, or the secretary determines the custodial or non-custodial parent has good cause for not complying with child support obligations. And I believe the only other change in this statute is a technical change to get rid of a slash on page 2. And with that, I'll be happy to answer questions.
Committee questions for Jenna? Seeing none, thank you, Jenna.
I forgot to say the House vote was 76 to 46.
Thank you. We have, to make sure that we hear all of the testimonies, please keep your testimony to 2 minutes, and then that will give us more time for questions after. So let's start with our first proponent, and I think Representative Auerkamp is probably on the House floor, correct? So we will have Stephen Green.
Good afternoon, Chairwoman Gossage, members of the committee. I appreciate taking the opportunity to hear this bill, House Bill 2141. Essentially what this bill will do or will require currently custodial parents, meaning the children's parents that have custody of the children, are required to cooperate with child support enforcement, a program within DCF, as a requirement for food stamps or food assistance. There are several other programs that they receive in which they would be required or are currently required to do that. What this bill is doing is essentially saying if a non-custodial parent is applying for food assistance, they are also going to be required to cooperate with child support enforcement as a condition for receiving food assistance. You have my testimony before you. I've mentioned this in the House side. DCF did a study in conjunction with FGA on the impact of when they did child support enforcement as a state. They saw a $1.8 million increase in child support each year. This is dollars going into families' pockets. Some people since have said DCF has noted that they haven't been able to replicate the study. I would just point out we haven't seen the details of how and why they weren't able to replicate the study, which would be helpful to see. Other states are pursuing this policy, Nebraska for one of them. In 2019, the USDA Food and Nutrition Services actually sent out a memo asking states to consider doing child support cooperation for both non-custodial and custodial parents for food assistance. We just believe that putting child support or requiring child support cooperation for food assistance is a good thing for both families. That this allows a family or a parent that may be disconnected with their child to be reconnected through child support enforcement. There are good cause exemptions, so if there's a threat to the life of or concern for the wellness of the parent, there is a policy that DCF has with that. I would ask that you support this bill. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, and thank you for staying within your time limit. Committee, we will now move to the opponent testimony, and then we will open it up for questions. And we will begin with Aaron Melton.
Good morning, committee. Chairwoman Gossage and members, thank you for having me today. My name is Erin Melton. I'm the Food Security Policy Advisor at Kansas Action for Children. We oppose House Bill 2141, which would add yet another barrier to the food assistance program, which is an extremely effective and crucial anti-poverty program that provides 100% federally funded grocery benefits to Kansas families living on low incomes, specifically at or below 130% of the federal poverty line, which for a family of 3 is just $29,940 a year. 1 in 10 Kansans and 1 in 7 children in Kansas are experiencing food insecurity right now, and 2141 would exacerbate this problem of hunger that we have right here in this state. It would punish low-income, non-custodial parents for temporarily difficult circumstances outside of their control and make it even harder for them to get back on their feet and back to supporting their children in every way that they can. It would also impose an inflexible, one-size-fits-all approach to child support, disturbing or not accepting arrangements that low-income families have determined are in their children's best interests. Finally, this bill could end up harming even more children because just because someone is a non-custodial parent does not mean that they don't also have custody of another child living in their current household. And when one person is disqualified from food assistance, the entire household's benefit amount does decrease, and the whole household can even become ineligible. If we want to increase support and co-parenting, this bill is not the way to do it. It would be harsh, it would be ineffective, it would be counterproductive to the goal of, having all parents support all of their children in every way that they could. And we ask the committee to please vote no, and I'm happy to stand for questions if there's time.
Thank you. And now we will go to the next opponent, which is Marilyn Harp.
Thank you, committee. I'm Marilyn Harp. I'm citizen lobbyist. I have been the executive director of Kansas Legal Services for the last 14 years now, 14 years, worked there for 43. I'm now retired. And in that regard, knowing about benefits and low-income families is something that I've developed a considerable experience in. One of my concerns that I think you should consider in this bill is families who are coming out of foster care. When you have a child in foster care, you come out with a child support order. It's part of the deal. And those are families that we don't want to see struggle with food, and yet this bill has the potential for doing that. Also want to point out that the parents, the non-custodial parents who might be impacted by this are people making $8.50 an hour or less, because that's the top income you can have and still qualify for food stamps. So we're saying that those workers who work full-time at $8.50 an hour are the only ones who would be punished by this bill. The ones we seem to be most concerned about collecting child support from. Finally, I might point out that there's a legislative post-audit report on child support collection due out soon, sometime this month. Might be more appropriate to set this bill aside and see what that group came up with as a recommendation for assisting with child support collection, instead of just assuming that this might be their top recommendation, that we worry about people who make $8.50 an hour or less. And finally, I'd point out that there's a $2 million fiscal note that goes with this. Although the bill has been changed, we really don't know what the new cost of doing this will be, because a new fiscal note was not submitted. So you may be spending $2 million for something not effective.
Thank you. And next we go to Rebecca Gaston. Is Rebecca in the room? Then we will proceed to Haley, forgive me, Kotler, and she's on WebEx. Can you hear us?
Good morning, committee. I can't hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, and how do you pronounce the first name?
Haley.
Haley.
But I'll
Welcome,
go by
Haley.
anything, so thank you. Good morning, Chairwoman Gossage and members of the committee. First, I just want to say thank you for allowing me to be here via WebEx. I take care of my mother with a terminal disease, so I appreciate being able to virtually attend. My name's Haley Kotler. I am a campaign director at Kansas Appleseed. Kansas Appleseed opposes House Bill 2141, which would just make it harder for Kansans and their families to put food on the table by restricting access to SNAP food assistance. As you know, SNAP food assistance is the largest food assistance program administered by the USDA. Simply put, SNAP, it really is our nation's most critical anti-hunger program. The benefits with SNAP are an essential part of many food insecure Kansans' budgets. Reducing this budget puts children at risk for food insecurity and inadequate nutrition, and as well as a greater risk of suffering long-term consequences to their educational achievement and health. I'll just say that we've seen legislation and programs similar to this across the nation. For example, North Carolina found that the program to be highly inefficient way of getting assistance to families. It cost $2 million to implement, but only led to about $7,000 in child support payments. Additionally, Utah chose not to implement the policy after a study showed it would be costly as well. And in lieu of time, I'll just say that right now, 1 in 10 Kansans and 1 in 7 Kansas kids are facing food insecurity. In some areas of the state, such as Southeast Kansas, that number is actually much higher, with close to 1 in 7 Kansans and 1 in 5 Kansas kids going hungry. I'd love to work together with you all to work on practical policy solutions that could increase access to food assistance in Kansas. We just don't think that this bill is one of them. Thank you for your time, and I will stand for questions at the appropriate time.
Committee, this is the appropriate time. Do we have any questions for any of the conferees? Senator Petty.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I do have a couple of questions for Stephen Green. Hi, thanks for being here. And of course, we just heard that this was a failure in North Carolina. You did refer to Nebraska, but I don't think when you mentioned Nebraska, you didn't. Did Nebraska actually pass this legislation?
Sorry, Madam Chairwoman, they took it. It is actually in the USDA food stamp program. They're called SNAP options. There's 24 different types of options. Child support cooperation, both for custodial or non-custodial, is an option that states can take within the food stamp program. So they took it as a program, administering the food stamp program for the state of Nebraska.
But they didn't pass legislation?
No, not that I'm aware of.
Okay. And so are there any states that have passed this legislation?
I can look. I honestly don't know. I'll be happy to check.
Well, I think you referred in your testimony to multiple states, and so I was trying to get that information. So actually, it appears that no states, to your knowledge, have passed this legislation.
Right.
In fact, North Carolina that did have now rescinded it.
And I don't know if to that point, excuse me, Madam Chairwoman, if that is again a legislation or a policy option that they've taken and have rescinded or decided to do that. I could also get a list of states that have taken the option from a policy perspective as well.
Sure, there's a difference between policy and legislation. Do you think that this policy could cause maybe this was addressed with the amendment that happened in the House when it comes to a custodial parent that has chosen not to seek child support for safety reasons?
Yeah, Madam Chairwoman, I really appreciate the question because it is a genuine concern that the opponents have had. And one thing that I would just point out that DCF, it's actually policy, I think in their Keys Manual 2162, which is good cause for failure to cooperate. It actually lists at least 5 different situations in which DCF would not be required to further establish child support enforcement or cooperation because there was a immediate threat or a fear of threat from the person applying for benefits. And so, for instance, it gives, and I have the policy in front of me, the caretaker, in this case, good cause would be a caretaker was a victim of domestic violence, and they feel as if there is a threat to their life, the safety, or the well-being of their children. So I think DCF in their policy addresses the concern of any threat to that person specifically. And in those cases, DCF would allow them to receive food assistance and establish good cause. So they wouldn't make that person or require that person to comply with child support.
And lastly, so Jenna, is there actually a definition for good cause?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Senator Petty. The bill does state that the Secretary would determine if the custodial or non-custodial parent has good cause for not complying with child support. It does not give a definition, so that would be up to the discretion of the Secretary.
Thank you.
Senator Steffen.
Thank you. My question really kind of got covered, but we'll cover it again, and I'd like an opponent's answer on it. Again, in Representative Francis Auerkamp's testimony, the last paragraph says, please keep in mind that DCF has flexibility to determine good cause for noncompliance and can continue the food welfare when finding good cause. I would like an opponent to comment on that.
Madam Chair, Senator Stephan, DCF would have more information than me, of course, but the issue is that the good cause definition that was just being referred to that exists in DCF's manual is for custodial parents, because currently only custodial parents are being affected by the existing rule. There is not a clear definition of good cause for non-custodial parents, and the concern that myself and a few other opponents have is that there would be some sort of casualties, for lack of a better term, as this is being implemented, in that someone who just can't afford to pay because they lost their job last month and are trying to get back on their feet with food assistance, because most people on food assistance are on it for a very less than a year, that those people would sort of slip through the cracks as good cause is being defined for non-custodial parents.
Thank you. Senator Baumgardner?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and you may want to just stay up there because it indicates here that a disqualification would not apply to if the court is allowing the parent to delay payment, if the parent is complying with a payment plan approved by the court or the secretary. And the third is if the secretary determines there's good cause. So there's 3 different carve-outs in there. Are you saying that what needs to be amended is it should say parent or non-custodial parent? Because I haven't heard anyone say, here's a recommended amendment that would alleviate our concerns.
KAC's position is that this policy can't be amended to not be to alleviate our concerns. But specifically when it comes to the court order, if I may defer to Marilyn, I know that she knows more about how that process works from the child support perspective.
I don't think that we need to know the whole process. I think many of us are familiar with that process, but we clearly have that. The concerns that have been expressed are, what if the parent can't make the payment? Or what if they're in an abusive relationship? And the carve-out, the protection is there, that they wouldn't be disqualified.
Thank you, Senator Baumgardner. And Senator Blasey with the last question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Is there a representative from DCF in the room today, this morning? Oh, there she is. Okay. I was just curious on the fiscal note. Sorry, it's kind of, long walk. On the fiscal note, there's some amendments in the House. I was curious if your original fiscal note still stands at $2 million as mentioned by one of the conferees, because there was an amendment on terms of frequency, and I was just curious if there was an adjusted amendment or fiscal note.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Senator and committee. The fiscal note with this, we did have an opportunity to amend in our testimony for this committee. The fiscal note no longer involves additional full-time equivalent positions, so we would no longer need as many additional staff as the original bill. So as amended, our costs are limited to information system programming costs, so that the child support information system can talk to our eligibility system. Those costs are $880,000. With that, the child support system has a little bit different mix in terms of federal and fee funds, and the eligibility system then has a different mix of state general funds and to get to its all funds. So out of all that, the state funds is $235,000, but the costs are limited to information system improvements.
Thank you very much, Tanya. And now, committee, this closes the hearing on House Bill 2141. We will begin final action. And do we have any amendments on the bill before we have a motion? Senator Erickson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have an amendment. Madam Chair, for the sake of time, this is a technical amendment, and I will let Jenna explain the implications. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This amendment actually comes from the House Chair who asked us to offer it. When the House Committee amended the bill, the title was not changed enough to accurately reflect what the bill does, and our office has the requirement that a title in the bill has to say what a bill does, and so this is a technical amendment that just clarifies in the title the changes that were made by the House.
I'm happy to stand for questions, Madam Chair.
Any questions for Senator Erickson? Senator Petty.
Thank you, and thanks, Jenna, for that explanation. So the identifying when the Secretary for Children and Families shall review cooperation with child support, so does that clean up the discrepancy between occasionally or annually, or does it still leave that in place?
Jenna.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This does not change any of the text of the bill. It changes the title only. So if there's questions about the text of the bill, that is unchanged by this amendment.
Thank you.
Senator Erickson, do you move your amendment?
Madam Chair, I move my amendment.
Do you have a second? Senator Baumgartner. And committee, all in favor of the amendment, say aye. Opposed? The amendment has been approved, and now we are moving to a vote on the House bill as amended. Do we have a motion? Senator Erickson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move that we pass out House Bill 2141 favorably as amended.
A second from Senator Baumgartner. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Would you like to be recorded?
Yeah, you did.
Okay. Okay. Since I did not ask for discussion, your discussion, would you like to still give it?
Thank you. I have huge concerns over this because we need a comprehensive audit to proceed, and this looks like it will be a very costly program that likely won't save much and just increases barriers to feeding children who are hungry. So I vote no. Thank you.
Senator Petty.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I totally agree. We are, again, just discriminating about the poorest of the poor, and when we're talking about a benefit of $6.10 a day, that is incomprehensible. And the fact is also, which was mentioned by one of the opponents, about the fact that there is a study that's being done on child support enforcement, and that that information has not come back yet, is something that we should be interested in, but this is not the way to go about it.
Thank you, Senator Petty. And now we'll begin the hearing on Senate Bill 234. This should be very short. We only have 3 conferees.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Senate Bill 234 relates to a closed-loop referral system, and it would require consent of an individual's information to be added or transmitted to a closed-loop referral system. And many of you may not be familiar with this term, so Section 1 defines in subsection B, a closed-loop referral system is a system that stores an individual's data, specifically their social care information, for the purpose of making referrals, and that system shares its data with a network of entities and other entities that provide social care, and is capable of updating or showing updated referral activity. And this bill would require, this would be on page 2, subsection C, that notwithstanding any other law mandating sharing of information, an individual's personally identifiable information or their social care information, which is information essentially about an information receiving social care, so things like food assistance or nutritional needs, housing, transportation, economic stability, assistance with childcare, whatever information that you are receiving about your social care information cannot be shared without a consent that is given each time that information is asked to be shared. And paragraph 2 would state that a participating organization, which is an entity that provides that social care, shall not have access to an individual's personally identifiable information or their social care information unless that individual has been referred to that organization and gives consent for that organization. Paragraph 3 would require those organizations to adopt policies and controls to define roles necessary to do those referrals and provision of services. And subsection D on page 3 would prohibit a participating organization from selling or licensing an individual's personally identifiable information or social care information without explicit written consent, and would specify that a little checkbox like you might see on an internet terms of service contract would not be sufficient to constitute explicit written consent for this subsection. And subsection E specifies that nothing in this section would supersede requirements for HIPAA laws. So that personally protected healthcare information, those laws would not be affected by this statute. And I will be happy to answer questions.
Questions for Jenna, committee? Seeing none, we will start for the proponent, Stephen Green.
Good morning, Chairwoman and members of the committee. My name is Steve Green. I represent Find Help, who's brought the bill for you all for consideration. I'll be very brief in my comments of why I think this is worth policy consideration for you all to consider. Senate Bill 234 just establishes guardrails for how sensitive information is obtained and shared by any state department using a social care network or a closed loop referral system, or if they were to provide that service through a contracted provider. You may hear that this is fundamentally an issue between one vendor versus another vendor, or hampering innovation. What we would say is this is 100% a consideration of privacy. And it's this, that a person, when they go and look for assistance at a local food bank or a domestic assault shelter, that person ultimately has a right to consent of how, when, and why that sensitive information is shared and being accessed and by whom. Currently, there's a large space of social care networks that are popping up around the country. Oftentimes, they take the HIPAA model, which is that one-time consent and all. That's an important feature. Protected health information should be protected. This law this would not apply to HIPAA guided law. This is specifically a gray area of social care, often referred to as surveys with social determinants of health. Those surveys do often consider very sensitive information. For instance, do you feel safe at home? Do you have any substance use disorders? Have you had a mental health crisis in the last 6 months? And all we're saying in this bill is that if the state is going to adopt or contract out a social care network, that they should do so with a consent model, which each and every time that person is being referred out, that person should consent to have their information shared. We fundamentally believe that self-directed care in times of need is both transparent and also the best way to help people. So with that, you have my testimony before me. Thank you very much. I'll stand for questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you, Stephen. And Paul Fassbinder is our first opponent in oral. Is he here? Oh, yes. On WebEx.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Gossage and members of the Public Health and Welfare Committee. My name is Paul Fassbinder. I work for Unite Us. We run networks in 44 different states, social care networks in 44 different states, including in Kansas, where we work with local partners such as Salvation Army Veterans Program, Catholic Charities, and United Way. We object to the current form of legislation in front of you today. This legislation will put burdensome requirements on numerous organizations that already must comply with a myriad of federal and state privacy laws. We do not think that platform-specific privacy regulation promotes coherent policy for collaboration among healthcare, government, and community partners. As written, this bill would not even permit a provider to access a client's information, even if the individual who sought services directly from that provider consented to share their information with that same provider. This bill also creates conflicting obligations for business associates that are already strictly governed by HIPAA, and will create confusion among every health and social care provider in Kansas. Our company prioritizes the privacy and dignity of individuals seeking care, and we treat all social care data like healthcare data. Our platform is HIPAA compliant, and we support quality coordinated care networks that ease the burden on individuals and streamline the delivery of services. As written, we do not believe that Senate Bill 234 accomplishes these goals. I appreciate the committee's time and will be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. We'll have questions in just a moment. My first apologies that you came in from Tennessee and we weren't able to get to this bill earlier. Thank you for being with us on WebEx.
No worries at all. I completely understand.
Thank you. And now we'll move to Kelly, and I believe it's Davyadov.
Yes, thank you. Kelly Davidov. Madam Chair, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to provide testimony in opposition to Senate Bill 234. I serve as Executive Director of Child Care Aware of Kansas. We lead a network of child care resource and referral agencies across the state that provides direct referral services for families seeking child care. In order to provide this service, we utilize a proprietary referral database that families access via our webpage or via one-on-one support from a child care referral specialist. Just in the last year alone, we completed over 16,000 child care referrals to families seeking care. While we strongly support data privacy and protection, several of the provisions within SB 234 have raised significant questions and concern about the potential for unintended impacts to our ability to provide childcare referrals to families. First, we rely on our current ability to interface with key public data systems to maintain up-to-date information about active, compliant childcare programs when we're assisting families seeking care. Secondly, not all childcare programs are formally organized as a business entity, and many are simply operating as individuals and sole proprietors. So we're concerned that data about childcare providers, particularly those that are not formally organized as a business, would be subject to Section 4 of this bill, and that we would be required to obtain explicit written consent from childcare providers each time we provide their information to families. And please keep in mind, we do that over 16,000 times per year. So if this is the case, our ability to provide childcare referrals may be severely restricted or delayed. Families across Kansas are already struggling to access affordable, high-quality childcare, and so for that reason, we respectfully propose that this bill be amended to exclude childcare from the definition of social care or otherwise exempt childcare referrals from the requirements of the bill. Thank you very much for your time, and I'm happy to stand for questions.
Committee, are there questions for any of the conferees? Senator Blasey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This question is for the gentleman from Unite Us. I hope while you were in Kansas, you were at least able to get some barbecue. Thank you for having the trip out here.
We had a good debate on it.
Good. I think Kansas is probably better than Tennessee. I've been there. It's great state, by the way. But
thank you.
So I was just looking at your press release last month on your website about how you guys were touting the analytics that you have on your system, that you're able to target individuals and connect them with other services. However, is it fair to say, though, that you guys are using your services to be able to connect people to other, to push people on more welfare services? I mean, it's really just kind of you're jumping a few extra steps, you're not having the consent, and you're just really expounding the system. Any feedback on that?
No, not at all, Senator. I would say there are instances where we may notify people if they're available for certain programs, but no, we don't target people. And we try to, and I would say we're a platform. So we are not doing anything. The organizations on our platform may be letting citizens or people know that they're available or they're eligible for certain programs, and they may refer them to those, but we do not do that.
Senator Holscher.
Yeah, my question is for Stephen. I'm concerned about the burdensome nature of this bill in terms of the way it impacts clients and health staff. And we already have personal health related data that has substantial protections there. So I guess my question is, the client that you are here on behalf of, I'm guessing that the software and service that your client provides meets the standards that are in this bill?
Madam Chairwoman, if I may, yes, Senator, it does. And to that point, there was, and it's noted in the testimony, two things. First, find help is expanding across the country and going into various providers, MCOs, health community organizations, and we're not hearing that consent model is in any way burdensome. In fact, in the testimony, note that they actually say that they appreciate the fact that we are so concerned as sort of a first point that their privacy is protected, and they're the ones that have to consent. They're the ones that they have to know when that information is being referred out. It's just not being sent out into a network in which people could access the information at any point. So that, I hope that answers your question. We've also heard feedback from some of the community organizations that had concerns. Note that in just at the end of my testimony that there was just amended language that was aimed at alleviating a lot of concerns from stakeholders.
So, yeah, a follow-up is I was going to ask, like, how many stakeholders were involved in drafting the bill in that process?
That's a good question, Madam Chairman, if I may. That's a good question. I think as organically as this comes, I don't want to say how many organizations as a whole. I would say that there was multiple organizations that we talked about this bill prior to it being introduced before the 2023 legislative session. And then since it's been introduced, I've tried to reach out any stakeholder that might be impacted at the best that I could of just trying to see if they had any concerns, if there was any language that would be helpful to alleviate those concerns.
Senator Petty.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And this is a question for Paul on WebEx. Paul, thanks for being here. You mentioned some organizations. You mentioned, like, for example, Catholic Charities. And so if a client goes to Catholic Charities for assistance, currently, how does that process then work?
If somebody presented to, say, Catholic Charities for assistance, and they were asking for help from Catholic Charities, there's no requirement to get on a platform. They would just receive direct assistance from Catholic Charities. If Catholic Charities, if they needed help that Catholic Charities could not provide, Catholic Charities could refer them. And if we're just using Catholic Charities as an example, it could be any organization. The organization that is on the platform, the organization could refer them out with their consent. And how that works is they sign. There's a signed and dated consent form that says, I consent to being referred. And then the organization will work with that individual and gain their secondary consent. They will know and gain consent to where they are sending the referral. So in our system, at least, I can just speak to our system, a referral is not blasted to like 30 different organizations. Now, if the person says, hey, this is an emergency, I need food assistance, can you refer me to a number of food banks, and I need to take the quickest one? Then that person will have a say in where that referral goes. And by I mean the person who comes for help. And in our system, just to take it a step further too, the only information needed to send out a referral is the person's first, last name, and date of birth. That's it. No other information.
Thank you.
Committee, we have time for 2 more questions, and those in the audience and on WebEx who know we have to stop, usually at 25 after for someone else to come into the room. Because it's Friday, we were able to go a little over for us to get to these 3 bills. However, some of us have a 9:45 that we need to get to. So we're going to take the last 2 questions. Senator Erickson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Very quickly, this is for Stephen Green, because I see in written opponent testimony, Stephen, from the Kansas Association of School Boards, they're concerned that this bill would prevent them from sharing information in an emergency situation. To my knowledge, that would violate FERPA. Does anything in this bill trump federal law as it relates to FERPA?
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I believe the answer is no. And then even in working with some of the providers to clarify, just to make explicit that this wasn't going to trump any current federal law, but also any state statutes related to the juvenile offender code and also SYNC. That was a concern, and so we wanted to accommodate anybody's concern about that specifically.
Senator Blasey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And this question is again for Paul. Help me understand, so kind of piggybacking off Senator Petty's question, what information do you exactly gather from the individual seeking help? And then what, I'm assuming you share that information with other entities.
When you say other entities, what do you mean by that, Senator?
So if someone comes to your platform seeking help, what information do you gather? I mean, obviously their name, but what other information do you gather? I mean,
all that is, it is up to the individual to provide the information that they want to provide. So if, let's just say I came to an organization that provided transportation, and we have a no wrong door approach, so I'm using this example, and I needed food assistance. And they said, well, we don't have food assistance, but we can refer you to an organization. All they need is my first, last name, and date of birth. Now, if I wanted to provide more information, and let's say, hey, I need food assistance, you need to know I'm a diabetic, or you need to know I have an issue with this food or that food, they may make that notation in the platform as part of the referral, or I don't have to provide it, but when I am referred and the organization accepts my referral and I go to that organization to receive help, I can give that information then. Now, there are some organizations that may need further or deeper information, but that's generally, if that person's not presenting to those organizations right away, that's generally collected when they do.
Committee, thank you so much for your attention today. This concludes our hearing on Senate Bill 234. We will not be taking final action on this bill. We are adjourned.